every year at the end of the year, I do a workflow overhaul to wrap up that year and to get ready for the next one. And a big part of that is my storage solutions. Where am I keeping my files? Do I need to make folders for the next year? I need to make sure that everything's backed up for the year that I'm just finishing. And I take a big bird's eye look at the way that I'm currently dealing with all that stuff and see if there's any ways that I can improve it going forward. If you shoot photos or videos, you're definitely familiar with the fact that the files that we're dealing with nowadays are bigger than ever. And if you're advancing in your career, you're probably shooting more and more than ever, and you have to have bigger spaces to keep all that stuff. So this year with my workflow overhaul, I've got some new stuff that I'm very excited about in these boxes that are definitely gonna help me to make sure that I can solve some of the problems that I've been having in the back half of 2024. So in this video, I wanna talk to you about some of those problems, just in case you might be having them too, and how these things are going to help me solve them, just in case that might be helpful for you as well. So secure the cup, and let's get these out of the boxes. So what I've got here is the Synology DS1821 Plus, and this is gonna be the new unit that houses all of these hard drives that I've got here. So I've got 6 different 16 terabyte hard drives that are going to make my RAID array. Now, if you've got a keen eye, you might notice that there are 8 slots on this, and that's just gonna give me the ability to be able to expand or make decisions on how I wanna change it up a little bit later. I've left myself a couple of slots for that. I've also got a 10 gigabit card that I'm able to put in this, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. And then I've got some memory for the unit too. So the first thing that I need to do is actually get this all put together and get the system set up on my computer, which is gonna take a while. So I'm gonna get that done, and we'll come back and talk about the important stuff in a minute. Now, just in case you are actually interested in the hardware setup here, the first thing that I did was added those 16 terabyte hard drives into the sleds that go in the first 6 bays. I thought I was gonna need my tools, but it turned out it was completely toolless. It made it super easy to do. Then I added an extra memory card on the bottom, so there was already one in there, but I added the extra one. And then we've got the 10 gigabit Ethernet port that I wanted to add on the right-hand side, which I had to take off that whole top part. But overall, Synology made this super easy to do. Okay, hardware is ready. Time to go do software. Okay, so we're back. It's about a week and a half later, and I can confidently say that I am already loving having this Synology NAS setup. One of the resources that was absolutely invaluable to me was the Synology help phone line. They were fantastic when it came to answering my questions and walking me through some of the processes that I was having difficulty with. So a huge shout out to the Synology help team. You helped so much, and that's a great thing to have for a system like this, where there's a lot going on. Now, the reason that it took so long to get the whole thing set up and to get going with it is because this system is going to be doing a lot for me. So I want to talk about all of those things and show you how it works into my workflow. First and foremost, a nice simple one, the NAS is going to hold a backup of my MacBook Pro. And there are a bunch of different ways that you can do this within the Synology software. So they've got a bunch of different backup applications that you can use. Time Machine, if you prefer to go that way, if you're a Mac user like me. The second backup that's going to go onto the NAS is a backup of my working drive. I always carry an SSD that I plug into my laptop no matter where I go that has all of my current projects on it. So I want to make sure that there is a backup of that happening at all times. Like, it's automatically backing up always for me. So I've set up using the Synology Drive client so that it's automatically syncing to my NAS no matter where I am. Now, it syncs a lot faster when I'm here in the studio and plugged directly into my local network, but it will also sync over the internet and come back to the NAS so that it's always going there. So those are kind of the 2 backups that I'm doing to the NAS, where the NAS is kind of the secondary place where those files are going to be held. But then the NAS is also going to be the main place where I hold all of my archival footage and photos. So generally, I organize things by year, and I'm going to be holding all of my 2021, 2022, 2023, and after this year, 2024 stuff on that NAS as the main place. Now, it doesn't happen super often that I need to get at those old files, but every once in a while I want that one shot from that one project just to add into a new video, or a client wants me to go back and touch something up and revisit a file or whatever. And so it'll be really nice to have those files easily accessible, and I can work on them straight from the NAS, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, one thing that's super important about the way that I'm hosting all of these files on the NAS is the ability to use snapshots. Now, right within the DSM, which is the operating system that is on the NAS, because it's its own little computer, you have the ability when you make a shared folder, which is what you call these folders that you're putting all these files in, you can set it up to have snapshots, which basically means that it's taking a little snapshot in time of what that folder looked like. And then if anything gets deleted or it gets added to, you can go back to that previous snapshot and look at what things looked like before. So if, for example, you accidentally deleted a file at some point, you could go back and get that file within the parameters of whatever you set up for the automatic snapshots. I really had no idea what I was doing with the snapshots at first, so I was just following some YouTube tutorials and that kind of stuff, and I probably will change how it functions over time if I notice that I'm using them or not using them in certain ways. Again, going back to the fact that this system is so customizable that I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna use it as I go. Now, speaking of being able to customize, I mentioned earlier that I left those 2 drive bays open right now because I don't know what I want to do with them, but the first 6 have those 6 16 terabyte hard drives in them. So if I pull out my handy dandy calculator here and we go 16 times 6, I should have 96 terabytes of total storage space. But I don't actually quite have that because I'm using something called a RAID array. Now, I don't want to get too in the weeds because I don't claim to be an expert on this, but what the RAID array that I use, which is essentially a RAID 5, is it gives you 1 disk of redundancy. So if 1 disk of those 6 fails, I still will be able to get all of the data and I can just replace that 1 drive. Now, the one that I've done is actually called a Synology hybrid RAID, and I've used the one that mimics a RAID 5, but it allows for the ability to mix and match drives a little bit better than a typical RAID 5 does. So those 2 extra slots that I have, I can always expand upon my system if I want to. And speaking of expanding the system, going back to that 10 gigabit Ethernet card. Now, the reason that this was so important for me is because I wanted to be able to edit photos and edit videos directly off the NAS without having to constantly be taking them back and forth from the NAS to my working drive, from my working drive to my NAS. And the typical 1 gigabit Ethernet ports that are on the back, the 4 of them, just aren't quite fast enough for what I want to do. I just needed the NAS to be able to read off of at a speed that was enough that I could work on them here and there when I needed to. So I added that 10 gigabit Ethernet port, but there was a lot more that needed to go into that. So you have to make sure when you add that you also have 10 gigabit Ethernet throughout the entire chain. So I actually had to get a 10 gigabit Ethernet switch so that I could plug everything into it. The NAS goes into the switch, the router goes into the switch, and the computer goes into the switch, and then everything gets kind of dispersed from that one point. And because I've got cables that support that speed, everything should work and everything should give me those speeds. But since my MacBook Pro doesn't have any Ethernet ports on it, I don't even think it's thick enough to have an Ethernet port on it, I also had to buy a 10 gigabit Ethernet to USB-C or to Thunderbolt converter that I could use so that I could make sure I'm getting those speeds as well. So there was a lot that went into making sure my entire system was up to that standard. This was a cool thing to learn a lot about that process and what goes into it, as well as just to make sure that my system was set up in the way that was going to benefit me. Previously, I had a system that was about 20 terabytes worth of storage on a direct attached storage, so a DAS, not a NAS. And the difference there is that that's just plugged in via Thunderbolt or USB-C. You can't actually use a lot of the functionality that you get out of the NAS. Now, just for example, here are some speeds that I get off of some of the drives that I use. So this is my old direct attached storage. This is one of my working drives that I use pretty regularly. And then this is the NAS. So look at these speeds that I'm getting off of it. So I can definitely edit videos off of this. I can use it for photo editing. And then just for reference, here's a super fast working drive that I'm going to be using in 2025. So with this setup, we're basically maxing out that 10 gigabit Ethernet, which is awesome. When I moved over to a NAS, I wanted to make sure that I had even better speeds than I was getting from the DAS, but I also have the connectivity of being able to access my files anywhere. And that brings us to one of the best things about having a NAS is that I can access my files anywhere. It's basically like my own private little cloud. And over the past week and a half, this has already come in handy so many times. I'm at home, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna grab a photo or something like that, but oh no, it's in the 2023 folder. Well, no problem. I just pull up the app on my phone, the Synology Drive app, download it straight to my phone, and then share it on the internet. Or I wanted to make space on my working drive, so I actually took some of the files that I was done with and moved them into the archival stuff straight from home. It took a little bit longer because it's going over the internet and it has to come back to the office, but it was working and I was able to free up those files before I left the house. This was one of the big things that I was missing previously when I just had a DAS system for all of my archival footage. I couldn't access it anywhere. I had to physically come into the office, plug in my laptop, and then I could get at it. Now it's available to me anytime I want, and I can share it with anyone I want. So the other thing about having my own little kind of cloud server is that I can bypass a lot of the need for things like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever. I can share files using Synology's software, send things to an editor if I'm working with them. I can even make them a user on the account, on the Synology account, so that they can log in and access folders or whatever I give them permissions for. Or if I have clients that I need to send files to, I can do it through the sharing functions on the DSM, and I can stop paying for those other cloud services because I can do it all through something that I own myself. Now, like I mentioned before, this NAS is its own little computer, so you can set it up in so many different ways to do so many different things. There are tons of apps that you can download that will automate certain things, and you can set up different features that I might not even have thought about yet. So I am barely scratching the surface of what is capable here, but there are a couple of things that it's already doing that are making my life easier, like automating all those backup tasks so I don't even have to think about them. It's allowing me access to those files from wherever I want, and it's getting rid of some of those cloud services. But there are a couple of things that I do want to check out further that I think will be really good for this system as well. The first of which is that you can hook up your NAS to a UPS, which is essentially a power server that is like a little battery so that you don't accidentally lose anything, because sudden power failures can be a problem for spinning hard drives and that kind of stuff. So just taking all the chance out of that. I want to look at that. I have a power system, but I'm not sure if it's compatible, so I need to do some research first. But I know that there are UPS systems out there that are compatible with the Synology NAS. And the final thing that I really need to get into that I haven't done yet is figure out how to back up the information that's on the NAS itself. Now, Synology has an app called Hyper Backup that you can use to connect to whatever your cloud service is. So you can use it with all sorts of different things. You can use it with Synology C2, which is their specific cloud backup service. The catch with cloud backups like that is that they work great if you've got, let's say, a couple of terabytes or something like that. But I've got 20 terabytes of archival footage on there right now, maybe even more at this point. And if I were to literally back up my entire NAS to the cloud, it would start to cost me a lot of money. Now, for some people, that might just be the way to go, especially big businesses and stuff like that, where you need to have all that stuff. But most of my archival footage, if it got disappeared on me, I would kind of shrug my shoulders and be like, well, too bad, would have been nice to have. So I don't necessarily want to go down that road, and I'm still exploring some other options. One possible other option is actually using Synology's ability to connect to another NAS that I have at home, duplicating everything to that kind of like a cloud for my cloud. And in the end, that would probably be more budget conscious. And again, Synology just has this stuff built in. There's a function inside the DSM that you can use that will automatically connect the two and make it super easy. The other option that I've been thinking about is using Synology's cloud service and using the hyper backup, but maybe just choosing which files are important to me to have going to that service. So I've got options. I've got to do a little bit more research and find out what works for me. And that's really what's important about this whole setup and this whole ability to do so many things, is just figuring out what works best for you. Now, I know that was a lot, so if you have any questions about my setup with my Synology DS1821 Plus and you want to know more about the way that I went about things, please leave a comment down below. Huge thank you to Synology for sending out these units and for sponsoring this video. If you want to know more about it, there will be a link down in the description to all of the gear that I got and all the stuff that I talked about in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.